Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by. Today's video is going to be just plants, not me. And the main reason is I'm still in my dressing gown and I will be staying in my dressing gown all day long because it's actually warmer than my clothes. And the weather we've had, hopefully it disappears later today, strangely enough. We've got a band of warm air coming in that's going to produce quite dramatic snow snow and freezing rain and ice on the roads and paths. It's going to be quite grim, but not here. It's just not here. We get away with it. The very south coast of the UK. If we get any snow, it will last about 10 minutes and it will be followed by rain. So we're going to get rain, and it's going to go mild. But at the moment, this house doesn't warm up properly. It loses heat almost as fast as I can generate it. It costs me a fortune to stay warm in weather like this. The walls just absorb the heat and then it disappears out into the atmosphere. You know, I feel like I'm heating the county of Dorset rather than just my own home. So what I'm going to do today is we're going to do an update look at my Cymbidiums. So I will get each one out onto the workbench on the turntable and we'll have a look at them each individually and see how the spikes are doing, you know, see how they're progressing in general. We haven't had a good look at them for a while now, and they are, quite honestly, the group of orchids that have got the most going on at the moment, hotly followed by the Coleogenes, but they've got the most going on as a group this time of year. Naturally cooler growers, and you know, I've got a couple in bloom and plenty of spikes to look at. So as I said, not me, I'm not in it. We're just going to look at the plants, and I'll keep out the way, but I'm going to have to do each plant one at a time. So I'll literally be just using the fade in and fade out between each plant rather than putting the camera on the tripod and watching me, you know, move a plant, pick another one up, bring it over. It just wastes time basically. So let's get going. Okay, so the first one we're looking at is my daughter Hannah's plant officially, although I've been looking after it for a few years now. Heavily virused, this plant. It's in a bad way basically. As a consequence, I'm not going to touch it because I'm moving on to my other plants. So I'll keep my hands away from it, and when I move it in a minute, I'll be moving it into the lounge, onto the table, out of the way, so that it doesn't get up against any of the other plants. It's just a matter of keeping it separate and not letting it touch anything else, and making sure I keep myself separate from it, if you see what I mean. So pick it up by the pot, you know, put it down by the pot, all that sort of thing. And it's manageable. There is a very, very slight risk element, but I'm prepared to do that. So this plant grew a nice new growth, lovely strong long leaves as far as the look of them is concerned, apart from the fact that they're absolutely full of the mosaic virus. It's a shame really. Anyway, it's got 2 spikes on it, despite the virus, and it looks like they're going to be quite good. This spike's progressing quite nicely now. It's going up its stake, buds are starting to separate, and as the buds move away from the spike, that's the sign that, you know, you're not too far off actually getting the blooms to open. Although I suspect it's probably at least 2 weeks away, if not 3. You know, they have to grow to a fair old size. Now what I'll do for each one of these plants is, where I've got a picture of the blooms and a name for the plant, I'll do pop-ups as I'm not doing a lot of editing. I can have a play with this one this afternoon after I've had my lunch. So that's that one. Apart from the virus, if you could disregard the virus look, it's actually quite a nice plant. It's my only plant that's been around long enough to actually have some leafless back bulbs around the back there. But it is virus and it has to be kept separate. So that's that one. Right, and the next one is also possibly virused. I'm still uncertain. A few of the newer leaves do look that way inclined, but they look quite different to the leaves on the previous one, and it could be a light issue on this one rather than a true virus. It is a bit of an exception because this one came from a visit to Mather's, the Mather's Foundation, but it didn't come out of the Mather's collection. It came out of David Mather's private collection. But that private collection was on display in the same glass house as their actual foundation collection. And I can't imagine they'd be silly enough to have untested plants in the foundation greenhouses. So even though it was from his private collection, I would imagine it had been virus checked prior to going on display in there. Anyway, that's where it originated from. Now, in theory, if it's got a virus, there's two places it came from. It already had it when it came here, unlikely, highly unlikely, or it got it here. And again, that's highly unlikely because it hasn't been near the other one. So it's debatable, but I keep it separate. This stays on the lower shelf of the staging, up this end, away from those at that end and away from the ones on the top. So it has its own little place, the same as Hannah's one does. Now this one is, it has what looks like a new spike just coming here, which is, boy, far behind where it should be, compared with the other spike, which is round here. That one's pushing on quite well, but it comes from the bulb that has the problem with the leaves. Yeah, and that is the new growth that it pushed up back in the summer, and it is the new growth that shows the patterning on the leaves. So a difficult decision with this one. Blooms are gorgeous, but given the size of that bulb and the size of the plant back, oh look, there's another spike in there, I hadn't seen that one. So it's actually got two more spikes to come. That is not a good spike for the size of this plant. It's got 6 buds on it. It had quite a lot more on the spike it had when I bought it, especially bearing in mind the plant was quite a bit smaller when I bought it. It's grown several bulbs since then. So I'm not quite sure what this one's up to. The latest bulb is nice and large and plump, and it grew good sized, strong leaves, but they do have that telltale pattern on them. So again, I'll keep it separate. So we got a maturing spike. These buds are not going to be too long before they're open. They might even be open before Hannah's one. There may be some telltale signs with the blooms, bearing in mind it could be virused. But it has 2 more spikes to come, one of which is pushing on quite strong in the middle there, and another new one round the side. So it should get more spikes as time goes on. Quite a large plant. Right, so this next one and the previous one have a story to go with them. Apologies for those who've heard the story before, but I do get new subscribers, believe it or not, and they won't have heard the story before unless they've watched the backlog of videos. When I got that previous plant, the Cymbidium copper, from the private collection of David Mather's, when I repotted it, there were 2 plants in the pot, and the blooms that were on the previous one, Cymbidium copper, were the reason I bought the plant. But there was another spike coming along behind. And when those blooms opened, they were totally different. And to me, it was pretty obvious it was a separate plant, and somehow or other, 2 different plants had got in the pot. Now, when you're repotting a load of Cymbidiums that all look the same, don't they? the plants I mean, you know, if they're not in bloom, which they wouldn't normally be when you repot obviously, it will be quite easy to do that. Well, it shouldn't be, but it possibly was. So this one was potted up separately, and I've just not given it a name. I've just called it a hybrid, and with my Cymbidium hybrid, so that I know which one is which, I put the colour in brackets as part of the name. So this is Cymbidium hybrid cream. It'll be interesting to see what the blooms are like, because a friend of mine that's been growing Cymbidiums a very long time, and I would class as a Cymbidium expert, actually said that some are very sensitive to light and feed type and quantities and watering, and they can affect the colours and patterning on the blooms quite dramatically. So there is still a potential that this one, because the blooms developed, you know, with me rather than at the foundation greenhouses, that they could be the same plant. I don't think they are, but we will find out. We will find out this year. And I can say this year now because it is 2025. God, I keep saying next year in my mind, but it is next year now. Next year is now this year. Are you following this? Anyway, we do have a nice spike coming up on here. New growths on this, nice big fat plump pseudobulbs. And at the moment, I'm pretty sure this one only has the one spike. We'll have a go. Oh no, it does have a second one. It does have a second large spike coming there. So again, 2 spikes to come on this plant. This was the smaller of the 2 plants, but it has produced some nice new growths this year. 2 in fact. This big one here and this big one here, and each of them have produced a spike. So this plant has almost doubled in size last year, and the bulbs it grew are nice big fat bulbs. So yeah, doing good. And obviously these spikes are relatively new to the plant. They will take a while to develop. That also implies it's a different plant to the previous one we looked at, because otherwise the spikes would be roughly the same development stage if it was the same plant. So again, it does imply this one did bloom later last year, and it's going to bloom later this year. So I think we can safely say it's a separate plant, which is a bonus because I only bought one and I got 2. So it's not a downside, it's an upside. This is a bonus. It's a separate colour and a separate plant that's growing quite nicely. And given that it was in the same pot as the one that looks a little virused, there's no sign of it on this one. The new bulbs have got nice green leaves. You'd think if they were both in the same pot, if one had a virus, they'd both have it, which also implies the other one possibly got it here and it didn't arrive with it. Anyway, we shall see. Coming on, this one, looking good. And the next one is my little miniature. It's funny actually, when you mention a miniature, Cymbidium miniatures are not small plants necessarily, and it depends somewhat on growing on. This came from the Rithington School project. They were selling some plants at a Bournemouth Orchid Society show, which is where I bought it from. It's a few years ago now, probably 3, and this was the size of the plant. Well, my new growth grown last year, where it got some good bright light with some spells of sunshine and some proper orchid feed, has grown a much bigger bulb with much bigger leaves. So it's not quite such a miniature as it once was. I'm a little disappointed that it's only got 1 spike. So as yet we have 1 spike. Relatively recently started, so a way to go. Now this one the last two Wessex spring shows, which are beginning of March, this has been in bloom for both of them. So that spike's going to have to get a bit of a shift on if it's going to have open blooms on at the beginning of March. Bearing in mind we're, heading into January now. It did grow two new bulbs, this one and this one, which came out the side of the plant late and has not developed fully. I'm not sure it's going to actually get any bigger, but it will provide a bit of support for the plant, even though it's not a patch on this particular bulb, which is what I would call last year's main growth, which is the one that's pushing up the spike. It'll be interesting to see how many blooms and how good a spike that one turns out to be, as it is actually on a bigger, stronger bulb than the plant's ever had before. It's still a young plant growing on, so it's might explain why it's probably only going to have one spike this year. But it'll have to go in a bigger pot once we get blooming over and it comes to starting new growth. It'll need a bigger pot because the new growths are highly likely to come out to the sides of this bulb here, and they'll be right up against the sides of the pot. It also needs a deeper pot. It needs to have much more root room to be able to grow well. So we'll get that one sorted. Most of my other Cymbidiums probably won't get repotted, apart from new acquisitions that I have not repotted at all yet. The ones that I repotted, most got done at the beginning of last year. They certainly won't need doing again, so they can stay in their pots. The only reason will be that they've not got enough room in their pot to grow on, so we shall see. So that's that one. Now this next one was a recent purchase, and it's something I won't do again. Actually buying a Cymbidium online, not physically seeing the plant I was going to get, I won't do it again. This one caught me out. It was sold in bloom when in fact it wasn't in bloom, it was in spike. That's a quite different thing altogether. It's also got these concertina leaves on this particular growth. Now that's probably lack of watering at that particular time that growth was pushing on. But what we've got here is, I hopefully believe, spikes. This is a new growth. It's not mature. The one behind it is a mature growth. It has a spike coming out of the side that I've only just noticed now. Yeah, that's new. And out of that growth it also has this spike pushing on here. Yeah, so that's good. This new growth is not mature yet, so it's out of character with the rest of the plant. There's also a spike here that doesn't seem to be progressing, so I'm not quite sure what that one's going to do. And then in here we do have another spike. So we do have quite a few spikes on this plant. In fact, there are three definite spikes that are pushing on. This one, and this new one, and this one that doesn't seem to be developing, so I'm not sure whether that one ever will. This is a new growth, concertina leaves. Something went wrong with the watering there, I suspect. That can be intermittent watering during an active growth period where the water and feed go in there and push the growth on, and then it stalls because it dries out, and then it kicks off again when it gets watered and fed. So intermittent watering can often cause that. Now that might not have been done in the nursery I bought it from. That could have been done in the place where they got it from. So anyway, disappointed not to get this in bloom. That would have been absolutely fabulous to have unboxed that and revealed these fantastic blooms. So obviously the picture of the blooms on this one, they're not mine. It's well, I took the picture off of the site I bought it from, seeing as those were the blooms I should have had, so I've taken their picture instead. Until I get my own, in which case they'll get replaced. But it's not a bad plant. As I said, I won't ever buy a Cymbidium without seeing it in bloom in the future. I need to see blooms. Buying them on spec as to what they might look like is perhaps not the best of ideas. But it's not a bad plant, and we've got a reasonable number of spikes. It's when they do come up and they do bloom, if certainly all three of them, possibly four, but definitely three, come into bloom at the same time, which they should do, that's going to put on quite a show. So worth it, even though it was also quite expensive. So that's that one. And this is my other miniature. Stop laughing. I can hear you laughing from here. It is a miniature. It's a miniature by definition of the length of the leaves, not the size of the plant. And if you put this next to my little showgirl that we've seen, you know, one of the ones we've already filmed, and if you put them next to each other, the new leaves on that miniature are the same size as these. These are a little bit fatter, but in length they're the same. You can also see that the bulbs are relatively small. You can also see that this plant is almost out of the pot now. It's distorting the pot. If it's left in the pot for another year, it will split the pot. So it's going to have to be repotted on. This plant, I haven't accurately counted the number of spikes on here because it's such a compact plant with so many pseudobulbs, I can't. But just as an idea, there's one there, there's one there, there's one in there, that's three just in that bit there. And as we go round, you'll see there's more, and there's, yeah, and there's some in the centre of the plant too. It's got quite a lot of spikes on. I'd say probably 6, maybe 7. The number of spikes it's got may not be the final number of spikes. It may push some more out because they're all in their infancy. They're not developing at a fast rate, they're new. And this is something, I mean, I'm not a long-term Cymbidium grower. I mean, I've spent a lot of years saying I don't grow Cymbidiums because I just had the one, Hannah's one, that I inherited. I didn't really get a choice about that one. It was a friend of hers who had orchids who died, and he had all his orchids in the windows in his flat near where Hannah lives, and they knew each other because of the orchids really. And when he died, she was presented with one of his orchids to remember him by. And then it was the normal expression that our offspring do, "Dad," because she didn't have the space or the knowledge or anything to attempt to look after it, so I inherited it. That's why it's with me. And strangely enough, it spent its first winter outside the house, at the other house, by the front door. It spent the whole winter outside. It got rained on, it got snowed on, it got frozen, and it survived. But I believe it's always had that virus, and the last repot with a bad growing season did it in. And the virus took hold, even though it was probably already there. Anyway, so this is going to put on, I would say, quite a wonderful show when it gets round to it. It's grown quite a few new bulbs, and it is producing quite a few spikes. And I think we should get a mass blooming because all of those spikes are around the same development stage. So they should all grow on at a similar rate. And this is a late bloomer. This doesn't come into bloom until sort of late spring. And as a consequence, it's going to put on a good splash of colour, probably out of the end of the Cymbidium season as far as my plants are concerned. And they're lovely blooms. They're not huge, but the spikes produce a good number of them, nicely patterned and nice colour and everything. So I think this one's going to put us on a good show when it gets to that point, but it's quite a way off. You know, we can't even see the spikes breaking out of the sheaths yet, so it's a long way off. In fact, let's have a go. It won't be typical because all Cymbidiums will behave slightly differently. But if we say those spikes have probably been there, I'll have a look at some previous videos. I suspect those spikes are already a month old. We could sort of work out, you know, how long between when the spikes started, when we first saw them breaking out from the bottom of the bulbs, to when the first bloom opens. How long is that? I reckon it's 3 months on average for Cymbidiums, but it may depend on the plant. Some might be faster than that, some may take longer, I don't know. Never tried that before, but I reckon around 3 months. So I reckon we should be seeing some blooms sort of at least towards the end of March, if not into April. Who knows, it might even be later than that. We shall see. But the plant's doing well, it's growing well, and although it's in one of my largest pots, it's going to have to go in a bigger one. It has no room for any further growth, so it's going to have to get repotted. And it has been repotted once already, but it got squeezed into a pot that was only just big enough for a year's growth. So that's my fault. It should have already been in a bigger pot. But it will probably get drop potted. By that, it'll get gently teased out of the pot by hook or by crook, because these pots are expensive and I don't want to rip one apart. They're really strong, heavy-duty pots that I paid for. So I don't want to lose the pot. As a consequence, I will take my time and I will get it out of the pot. And then I'll just tease away some of the medium without trying to get all of it off and bare root it or anything daft like that. And then it'll just get put in the bigger pot and all of the new medium will be put down the sides and gently teased into the gaps and everything. So the root disturbance won't be that great. And then it can grow on for another year or two after that. But it seems quite a vigorous plant. My alternative with this one is to split it. I could get 3 reasonable sized plants out of this, and this would sell. It's got a name, it's attractive, and it's not a giant. So in the Cymbidium world, this one is quite desirable. But I've always said at orchid societies, you can't give Cymbidiums away. Nobody wants them because of the size. So anyway, that's that one, doing good. I have to stand well back to get this one in. This is one of the giants, and the giant leaves on this plant are my bulbs from last year. They're the ones I've grown outside, getting some sunlight and getting some proper orchid feed through the season at regular intervals. It pays. Obviously I've produced much better, bigger, stronger bulbs and leaves than were on the plant before. So it is worth doing. Now this is another one, it's a strange one because it nearly came from the Mathers Foundation, but it didn't really. Because in their Cymbidium house, they've got their stock plants that they just grow for blooms, and they sell the bloom spikes for the actual flowers. And then they've got their breeding program plants, the foundation plants, and that takes up about 2/3 of the glass house that they're in. And then the other third is taken up by another company that grows Cymbidiums and sells them online. And don't ask me what it's called, because I did know, but I've forgotten. And it's one of theirs. So it's not, it came from the Mathers Foundation, but it's not one of their own plants. It's that other company that I got it from. And they have an arrangement that they use the glass houses, but in the main they get looked after by the Mathers support team, I believe, and Mathers are allowed to sell them at their open days. They're doing them a favour really, aren't they, by selling them? So that's where this one came from, and it's a nice strong plant. I've grown some nice bulbs, some of which are still developing, like this one here. It already had some good bulbs on it. It's a nice plant, but what it's not doing is producing lots of spikes. We've got one here, nice big one coming up there, and at the moment that's it, just one, and that's not very good at all. I suspect there will be more. This is another late bloomer. This blooms later in the year, so it's got plenty of time to produce some more spikes. It's a strong plant. There should be more spikes, but we shall see. As I said, there's only one visible at the moment, so I'm just double checking. I'm just spinning it, just checking. You have to check inside the plant as well, because they can come up, you know, from the side of one of the bulbs that are in the middle of the plant. No, it is just the one. So at the moment it is just the one spike, but it's grown well. It's got a pot full of roots, and there might just about be enough room for that to stay in its pot. If you look at this bulb here that's not completely matured yet, that's going to be on the edge of the pot. Well, when the new growth starts out of there, it won't have room really. So again, this ought to go in a bigger pot. Now, you've got choices with Cymbidiums, with pot size. They do like to be cramped. They do like a confined space for their roots. They don't like huge pots with lots of media that they don't occupy, if you see what I mean. So they don't mind being a bit squashed in the pot. So you can let them hang over the edge of the pot if you wish. It doesn't really do them that much harm, as long as some of the roots on that growth get into the media. Yeah? Most Cymbidiums by definition are either terrestrials or semi-terrestrials. There are some epiphytes, but not many. So as a consequence, they're not subject to aerial roots. So if you've got bulbs hanging over the edge of the pot that produce all their roots outside the pot, those are not going to benefit the plant that much. Yeah? So you've sort of wasted that root growth. It would be much better if it got into media. And what I've seen some people do when that happens is they actually take a section out of the pot and staple another pot onto the edge of it to temporarily allow the roots to get down into some media and on into the main pot. And then at repotting time, they sort that out into a normal pot, basically. But it sort of saves that part of the root system. Okay, so just the one spike on that so far, which given the size of the plant, I would imagine we'll get some more. And another new acquisition. I came back from the last Burnham's visit with this one. I ummed and ahed quite a lot before I came home with it, but I'm glad I did, because at the time I bought it, I just assumed it was a hybrid without a name, and a viewer actually named it for me and said, I'm pretty sure that is such and such, pop up, and I checked it out and I was quite confident it was. And then at a later date, when I was watering it, I noticed that the name was actually on the tag. So it is actually a named variety, and it turns out it's a primary cross with a history that I have an association with. I was a member of Bournemouth Orchid Society for quite a long time, and our president was Keith Andrew. And this original cross was produced by Keith Andrew Orchids at Plush in Dorset. So it's like an associated thing, and I'm pleased I've got it now that I know what it is and the history of the cross. Now, I can't imagine that this is an offspring of that original cross. I would imagine the cross has been done many times since. It's a simplistic primary cross, so it's not a difficult one to achieve. Anyway, we've got another spike to come. Buds are just sort of showing signs of splitting and opening. This is a weak spike with the top that broke, and then we've got this spike round here and then two spikes here, and it came with its own population of ants, which I have since deleted. They are ex-ants, they have ceased to be. It's a nice plant, quite a compact plant, and the number of spikes is great for the number of bulbs on the plant. So hopefully it's a floriferous variety, and as such when I grow this on, you know, into this season through the summer, some nice bright light and some good orchid feed at a reasonable strength, it should put on quite a few growths, and we should get a nice lot of spikes again next time. And next time round, the spikes will get this sort of thing done to them. Yeah, as they progress upwards, they will get a stake to hold the first third of the spike upright and then allow them to arch over away from the plant. That will save me worrying about the spikes becoming lower than the base of the pot, which makes them quite difficult to position. They have to go up. In fact, this one lives on top of those 3 pots to get it up away from the staging. So anyway, I haven't grown that plant. I bought it in bloom recently. I suppose as we've got blooms, we ought to have a close-up, didn't we? They are very attractive blooms. So there we go, that's that one. And this is the biggest by far. It's in the biggest pot, and unfortunately when I potted it, I didn't quite get the positioning right, and my assumption of where the new growths were going to come out was, well, I was going to say 100% wrong, but it was 180 degrees wrong, because they all came out on the other side of the plant, leaving room round this side where nothing grew, or nothing much anyway. It's a monster, this plant. It weighs a lot. It's quite heavy for me to lift. We do have some spikes coming. We grew some nice strong new growths. It's an older plant, larger plant, so we will naturally get old leaves dying off. That will naturally happen on this one. Not so much on the others because the bulbs are younger. But at the moment we've got a good spike coming out here, and I don't think there's many others showing yet, but there will be. I can only see that one at the moment. It's a nice strong spike. Yeah, I can only see the one at the moment, but there could be some lurking in the middle of the plant that are hiding. But one definite anyway. There will be more. I mean, it's grown quite a few bulbs this year, but as I said, they all the new growths are right on the edge of the blinking pot. It's a good strong plant, that's for sure, but I will get, probably by the end of this growing season, we will probably have some leafless bulbs as the season progresses. Some of the older bulbs may well drop their leaves. New growths on the plant, there are some. It went into a very large pot on the grounds it seemed like it was going to be very vigorous. It turned out that it didn't grow as much new growth as I was expecting. So it can stay in that pot another year, even though this growth is very close to the edge. It'll have to find room, basically, because the rest of the pot has still got room. And this one is a nuisance because it's filled its pot with roots, and it's relative for Cymbidiums. It's not a deep pot. Like most of the Cymbidium pots, as you can see, are deep. They're not that wide across the top, they're deep. This one isn't. It's a normal shaped pot, and that was to get one that size, but it's not deep enough, and it's grown so many roots that it's pushed the plant up out the top of the pot, which makes watering it quite difficult. Yeah, but the way I water these, you know, they're in a container. I keep pouring the water through. They get a good soak, and I still do that when they're outside. So it, you know, it's more difficult to water than the others, but manageable. The main problem with this one is its weight. It really is a heavy plant. But, you know, it's grown some nice growths. It's got some good leaves, and it's starting to spike. I suspect we will get more spikes than just one on a plant that size. If we only get one, I'm going to be very disappointed, and the chances are it won't be with us too much longer if that's all it's going to do. It's too much plant. That needs half a dozen spikes on it to make it worthwhile. I think that one originally came from Burnham's, and it had quite a few spikes on it at the time. But that could have been its good year. It could have had an exceptional growth year, the new growth then all spiked in turn, and that's the position it was in when I got it. And it could have bloomed itself out, because sometimes you get Cymbidiums, they have a good year followed by a poorer year, where the plant is getting its strength back, ready to do a good year, like on a 2-year cycle. So there are some like that out there, and this could be one. So it's a big plant though, and it's clumsy to handle, it's very heavy. And standing well back again, because again this is quite a large plant, and trying to lift this down off the staging, the blooms were actually tangled up in the flipping Christmas lights. They'll all come down tomorrow on Sunday. That'll be the end of those for another year. But, yes, nice large plant. I've grown some good growth on this one during the year, and I think we can safely say that we have definitely proved that the orchid bloom fertiliser plus the environmentals of the growing season have actually affected this plant, because the colour of the blooms are dramatically different this time round compared with what they were like when I bought it. I bought it in bloom. So from a nursery, I can't remember which one or where, possibly Burnham's, but the colour that was on it, I classed it as bronze. As I said, I put the colour as part of the name, and I called this one bronze. These blooms are far from bronze. They are a gorgeous pattern, deep coloured pattern, very pronounced patterning on the lip. These are good blooms, they're good Cymbidium blooms. And the spikes are definitely bigger, with more blooms. I don't know whether the blooms are actually larger, but the spikes have definitely got quite a few more blooms on. Now there could be some influences. The fact that the plant's a bit bigger and stronger would naturally probably produce more blooms per spike, but they're quite a different colour, much richer, well patterned blooms compared with what it was like when I bought it. So I think the bloom fertilisers had an effect, along with, can't say exclusively, it's not a scientific test, along with the fact that this got the environmentals suitable for growing. It did actually get some sunlight on it in the late afternoons. It was outside in bright light throughout the growing season, and it did get good nitrogen rich feed throughout that growing season. And then we switched to the bloom fertiliser once the spikes started to show, and I think it's had an effect. Enough that I will continue doing it. Simple as that. You know, I mean, I will just continue doing it, because it's certainly not done any harm. This is the first one to come into bloom, having started using that new feed. Grew some nice bulbs. It's a nice strong plant, and those new growths produced a spike each, so we've got 3 nice spikes on this one. This will go to the Orchid Society meeting next Saturday, so in a week's time, just to, you know, just so that I hardly ever take any plants into the Orchid Society, because it's such a faff. You know, I've got to get that in the car. Now, if that won't sit on the seat in the car, it'll have to go on the floor. And there's possibilities of damage coming up here, because if it's on the floor it's not very secure, so I'll have to find something to put it in to make sure the pot doesn't fall over. So most of my orchids, if I've only got 1 or 2, I put them on the seat and put the seat belt on them and holds them still, you know. But I'm pretty confident that's far too tall to go on the seat. It'll touch the roof and bend the spikes. It certainly won't go in the estate part of the car, because the height from the floor to the ceiling is nowhere near enough for that. I'm not laying it down on its side. It could easily roll, so it'll have to go in the back on the floor between my seats and the back seats, but it's got to be held in place. So as you can see, it's a faff with possibilities of damage, but I'll give it a go, because I would like to take that one in. Hopefully there is an individual there at the next meeting that I can quite happily ask an opinion of how is this plant as far as Cymbidiums are concerned. It's a very knowledgeable friend of mine who can give me a nice opinion on, is it growing well, has it been grown well, are the leaves a good colour, are these good spikes, although it hasn't got a name so it's difficult to compare, isn't it? Anyway, so that's my first one to bloom, my own, of this season. So, although it was open towards the end of last year, but yeah, these are my first blooms of the season that I've grown myself. And quite honestly, I think they're pretty special. And a good number of them. So on that good note, I'll leave you, and thanks for dropping by and all that and supporting the channel as you do. And I'll see you tomorrow for the Sunday chat. Subject as yet undecided, as usual. About 5 minutes before I turn the camera on, I'll think of something, I expect. If I don't get any sensible suggestions in the comments, I'll have to do one myself, won't I? See you next time. Thanks for dropping by.